Okay. The process logging framework has been completely ripped out from 2.0 and replaced with a new one, completely new. Both the engine and the resource service have been changed to this new logging base. They both now include audit logging, so every time a user logs on or logs off, every time a service connects to an engine or disconnects from an engine, every time a user session times out, every time Tomcat's shut down, all those things are logged in the audit log. You can see in this scheme, the schematic of the process logs, there's now a definition or a distinction between definitions of objects like tasks and nets and actual instances of them. In the old framework, those ideas were mixed. So the same table would have task definitions and instances of that task. They'd be completely separated in. This just shows the major relations between the tables, but there's other relations there that aren't shown there. Basically, it logs basically everything that happens during the process instance and later perusal. Full case histories are output in XES format. So XES format is a format that can be directly imported into PROM version 6. Through interface E, you have access to all of the process logs. Most of the methods will produce XML. But these case histories can be produced in OpenXES format to be read straight into PROM. The engine and resource service will produce XES format logs of their own process logs. And the resource service will provide a merge log where if you call it through the resource service, ask for the merge log, the resource service will call the engine, get its log back for the cases based on the specification, and then merge the engine log with its own log so you get a complete picture of what happened during that case instance. Future work will be to actually provide a user interface for that, so you can just choose what specification you want and we'll give you the log. But at this stage, it's available through the API. And here's an example of a very small extract of an OpenXES log for a case history. You can see here there's an event. For each event, there's a timestamp. There's a name. Concept name means to OpenXES what is the thing you're talking about. In this case, it's the approved purchase order task. The transition is the assignment, and the org resource or the participant that it was assigned to is shown there. That's the key of the participant. Again, here's one that completes the task, and here's an event which is a data update event. You can see here the life cycle transition value is unknown because PROM doesn't have a value for that type of, well, it's not really a transition, but it's an event that stores changes to data. And you can see here in the tags, depending on what type of data it contains, shows up in the tag there. And for complex type data, so here we have a transportation quote, which contains a number of fields. It breaks it down into transportation quote / order number / total volume, for example. So the complete value of a complex data type and the structure of the complex data type is stored in that OpenXES log. And this is actually, and because of that, this is a merge between this data, all resource data comes from the resource service logs. This stuff comes from the engine logs. All seamlessly merged together. As well as that process logging, we have a thing now called that we refer to as configurable logging. And what that means is you can, at design time, define a set of data that you want to have logged along with the events that occur in the engine. So, for example, when a task begins, you might want to log some data along with that, some sensor readings, for example, some comments, or some sort of archiving history or whatever. Services can take advantage of that and log any number of pieces of information or pieces of data along with any of those events that occur during the process lifecycle. For comments that are embedded as a log predicate, there's an extensive macro list available which allows you to embed into text comments certain runtime values for the net task or the variable or resources as well. And you can also embed X-query expressions inside those comments. Here's just a small sample of the types of macros you can embed into text for log predicates: current time and date, the name of the net, the version of the specification, the service that's handling the task, the codelet, if there's one associated with that particular item. A codelet is a piece of code that runs for an automated task. The current status of any timer that's associated with it. The name of the value of any named extended attribute that the task may have. The evaluated result of an X-query. So any X-query you like can be embedded in there. And here you can get access to the offer set, or these set of participants who are offered the task. And there's many, many more listed in the user manual. So as an example, in the editor, we can choose for a task. In this case, the task is called enroll. Go to the log predicates tab, and we can type in some text that we want to be logged in the engine's logs when this task starts and when this task completes. So on start, we can just write some text that says what ID the work item got, what service is handling it, when it was enabled, what its timer status is, and so on. And here we've chosen to write who performed it, how many items that participant had in his allocated queue at the time that he started the task, and so on. So there's a lot of information that can be grabbed at runtime and embedded in those log predicates, logged into the process logs along with the other events, and then retrieved at a later date for analysis. Now, when we refer to the engine being agnostic, we mean agnostic to users. So for a long time, there's been a disconnect, if you like, between where users should be supported in your environment. It was decided that once the resource service had started, that the responsibility for the resource level or the human user level should be taken out of the engine and handled by custom services or delegated to custom services. For example, the resource service. So the engine now has no concept at all of any human users. All it does is what its core functions are, which is take a process and advance it via its control flow and make tasks that become available through its control flow available to services to handle the execution of those tasks. Also handles the data perspective, so mapping data between nets and tasks at runtime and providing a process log. That's the core of what the engine does, and that's basically all that the engine should do and does do. So it has delegated handling responsibility of humans to services, of which the resource service is the prime example. Now, because of that, the engine will now only accept connection requests from services and not from users. So registered custom services and registered client applications. And the difference between a custom service and a client application is that a custom service is a service that at runtime can take responsibility for the execution of the task. Whereas client applications are services and standalone applications that don't take runtime responsibility for the execution of the task. So examples of custom services that do take runtime responsibility are the resource service, the workload service, the web service invoker, the SMS invoker, those sorts of things. A client application that's a service is the monitor service. It just simply displays what's currently running in the engine, but it doesn't take responsibility to execute tasks. And a client standalone app, or the editor, is an example of a standalone application. But anything that connects to the engine now needs its own user ID and password. And users don't connect directly to the engine. So the custom services form has been enhanced slightly to accept a password for a custom service. The name of the service becomes its username. Password is required when the service logs onto the engine or connects to the engine at runtime. The description is what shows up in the editor when in the task decomposition dialog to choose what service you want to associate with the task. And the URI is now checked when it's entered in here to make sure it is actually a real URI and that it actually does point to something that's running. So in other words, you need to load the custom service into Tomcat either locally or somewhere else, or have it available on the internet somewhere. And then when you put the URI in here, it's going to point to the right place. It sends a message to that service and gets back an acknowledgement. If it doesn't, then you won't be able to add the service. And naturally, each service name needs to be unique within that installation of the engine. The client apps is a new form in 2.1, but it basically does the same thing as the services tab, except for client applications. So here we have, from client application, we've got the editor there, and the monitor service, which again doesn't handle tasks at runtime, it just simply displays what's going on in the engine, so it's not a custom service. And name and password and description down here as well. This form also contains an edit tab, an edit button. If you press that button, you'll get the information from whatever's selected here, down here, and you can change its password and the description. Notice that the admin, the generic admin user account is listed there, and I'll talk about why in the next tab.